Okay, so we're diving right in today, getting right into it on the deep dive. And we're dissecting a pretty big, a seismic shift, you could say, in the NBA landscape. And that is, of course,
the Jimmy Butler trade.
The arrival of Jimmy Butler to the Golden State Warriors.
Golden State Warriors, yeah.
And all the ripple effects that is creating. I think a lot of our listeners are here because they want to grasp these significant developments, without having to kind of sift through the daily deluge, just fire hose of NBA news. So consider this your kind of streamlined access to understanding what matters, what truly matters in the Bay Area right now.
Exactly. And our mission today is really laser focused. Like, we want to determine just how profoundly Jimmy Butler has changed the Warriors. Like, have they actually become legitimate title contenders? We're going to be looking at how he's fit into the team, their performance since he's arrived, and, those big, scary obstacles that are looming in the playoffs.
Right.
And we've got some pretty compelling insights from, this in-depth analysis that we're going to be sharing.
Yeah, Jimmy Butler, man. I mean, just the guy, he just has this aura around him. He's really become this sort of synonym for winning. He's that guy who just seems to consistently elevate the teams he joins. We saw it obviously in Miami with, those improbable finals runs, and now he's
and the blue and gold.
He's wearing the blue and gold of the Warriors. And what I think is so fascinating about him is that, he doesn't always put up, these eye-popping MVP caliber stats.
Right.
But this analysis that we've been reading, they call him an underrated superstar.
Yeah.
So the question that we're trying to kind of figure out, can Jimmy Butler finally secure that elusive NBA championship with this Warriors team?
It's interesting, right? Because it's this consistent narrative that follows him throughout his career, right? This ability to just inject this level of grit and just raise the standard of the teams he's on, and this winning machine quality that the analysis talks about. It isn't necessarily about like individual scoring explosions, right? It's this pervasive impact on team success. So, the question of whether he can win a championship with the Warriors, that's the central question we're trying to answer today, right?
I remember when the trade initially went down, I was reading a lot of the kind of the chatter online, and there was definitely this kind of murmuring about how is he going to coexist with Steph, right? Because Steph's ball dominant, and the conventional wisdom was that there's going to be some spacing issues,
right?
But one of the things that this analysis pointed out, which I thought was really interesting, was that actually Curry doesn't need
a ton of space.
He doesn't need like acres of space. He can work even if he's just got like a sliver of space,
right?
And what they're saying is that Butler's presence has actually unlocked like a, quote, new dimension to the Warriors offense. So how is he doing that?
Well, I think you have to think about offense a little more broadly, right? It's about being adaptable. Mm-hmm. And the analysis really goes into detail about how Butler isn't just standing around waiting for the ball.
Right.
Like, his screening is actually a weapon. He's creating separation for Curry in ways that defenses are having a hard time dealing with consistently. And beyond that, I mean, his basketball IQ is so high. Mm. His playmaking, making the right pass, cutting at the right time. It just adds so many layers to the Warriors' attack. They're just way less predictable than they were before.
Right. So it's not like he's like cannibalizing shots.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's
so much more nuanced.
It's much more intricate. Yeah. And they really do drill down on his offensive repertoire in this analysis. Mm. They talk about his mid-range mastery,
which is wild at 34 years old.
And 34 years old, it's still there. Mm. They're saying his first step is still.
It's elite. He's so physical.
It's still elite. Yeah. And he's so physical, and he has this knack for drawing fouls.
Right.
And this is the stat that really stood out to me. The Warriors have gone from 27th to 1st.
In free throw differential.
Since Butler's arrival. Now, for those who aren't familiar, free throw differential is simply the difference between the free throws your team makes and the free throws your opponents make.
Right.
And a positive differential often indicates an aggressive attacking offense.
Right.
And that's a direct consequence of his aggressive, his approach to offense.
Yeah.
And, he gets to the line.
He gets to the line. And that jump, right? I mean, 27th to first. That's a huge testament to how he impacts defenses. He just puts them in these really uncomfortable positions, and it leads to fouls, easy points.
Yeah.
But what's also interesting is they talk about his IQ in screen-heavy sets, right? Like, he understands how to create space, not just for himself, but for all the shooters and cutters that the Warriors have. It's like it's beyond just executing plays.
Right.
It's orchestration.
Yeah. And it's wild because they point out he's actually taking less shots per game, like around 11, which is the lowest since his Chicago days.
Wow.
Which I think really just underscores this point that his value goes way beyond just putting the ball in the basket.
For sure.
So now the big question.
Yeah.
With all this positive impact that we're seeing, are the Warriors
legitimate contenders?
Legitimate contenders. The record 15-2 with Butler looks really impressive.
Very impressive.
But the analysis does bring up some caveats.
Right.
And kind of, pumps the brakes a little bit on whether they are actually legit contenders.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
What are some of the primary counter arguments?
Well, I think you have to look at the quality of those wins, right? I mean, a lot of them have come against teams that are, let's be honest, they're at the bottom of the standings, right? And some of them might even be, tanking. They want to lose games to get a better draft pick, right? They mentioned the Jazz, the Nets, the Sixers specifically. And, wins are wins, but they're saying that their best wins, the Bucks twice, the Knicks without some key players, the Kings, that might not be the resume of a true contender in the West,
Right. Beating up on lottery teams doesn't necessarily translate to success against, the league's elite.
Especially in the playoffs.
Especially when you get to the playoffs. Exactly. And speaking of the playoffs, one of the things that they bring up is that, the Warriors' playoff experience outside of their core
is limited.
Yeah. Obviously you've got Steph, you've got Draymond, and you've got some vets like Gary Payton II, Buddy Hield, but a lot of these guys haven't been there. They say that Kuminga and Moody, the young guys, like their combined playoff minutes it's low, and this Quentin Post, the second-round pick, unproven in these high-pressure situations. So that lack of deep playoff experience, that's got to be a concern, right?
Absolutely. I mean, playoff basketball is just a different animal, right? Like the scouting gets so much more intense, the pressure, it can really get to young guys. And the fact that a second-round pick is untested, I mean, it really highlights the team's reliance on the vets.
Right.
And that lack of depth, it could be a real vulnerability against teams with more experience.
Yeah, and they go on to kind of
map out.
Yeah, their potential playoff path.
It's a gauntlet.
And oh boy, it's a gauntlet. They're talking about a potential first-round matchup against the Lakers.
Always tough.
Followed by potentially the Mavericks with Luka, Doncic, of course.
And then the Nuggets.
And then the defending champion Nuggets. I mean, that's
a nightmare.
That's a nightmare scenario, man. I mean, to kind of navigate
that Western Conference bracket.
That bracket, And then they talk about, strategically, right? How do you slow down Luka? I mean, obviously, you try to double team him, you try to get the ball out of his hands, but
that's what opens up LeBron, right?
And then LeBron's sitting there.
If you get that Lakers matchup.
Exactly. And then all of a sudden, he's picking you apart.
Exactly. So you try to solve one problem and you create another.
Right, exactly. But then you have this kind of this X factor, right? Which is
playoff Jimmy,
which has become, it's become this
legendary,
like this legendary thing, and they really do focus on that in this analysis. They talk about how he's just got this proven track record of
turning it up
in the big moments. I mean, he practically dragged the Heat
to two finals
appearances.
Yeah,
and he was showing that clutch gene, time and time again. And now what they're saying is that he's finally got a teammate in Steph Curry, who is, arguably better than him.
Right.
And that's a pretty...
That's a scary thought.
That's a pretty scary thought, man. I mean...
And they talk about his 2023 playoffs, right?
They talk.
I mean, the numbers he put up, 27.4 points, 7.4 rebounds, 4.6 assists.
Funky Heat.
Carried them.
Yeah.
Against all odds.
Yeah. So now you pair that with Steph Curry, and it's like, how do you stop that? I mean, they talk about how Butler's, his whole skill set,
ball handling, defense, making the right play.
right? How that just complements Curry so well because, Steph he's off the ball, he's moving, he's
shooting.
He's shooting. It's a beautiful synergy, of
their strengths.
Of their strengths, and one of the things they talk about is, if the Warriors were to win it all, Butler's legacy, which has always felt a little
underappreciated.
Considering the impact he's had.
Right.
It would finally get
the recognition.
The recognition
that it deserves.
I mean, that'd be quite the
storybook ending.
That would be quite the storybook ending, yeah. Now they bring up a contrasting scenario with the Mavericks, right?
Yeah.
Post Luka Doncic trade.
Right.
And they paint a pretty bleak picture. They even talk about historic consequences.
Yeah.
Like potentially forfeiting games
due
to
roster
mismanagement and just poor performance. And they talk about how the Mavericks just don't have the depth.
Right.
They don't have that defensive identity.
Right. Yeah.
And it's put such an unsustainable burden on Luka. And they're even talking about their GM,
Nico Harrison,
like his job might be on the line.
Wow.
So how does this contrasting situation with the Mavs, how does that help us contextualize what's going on with the Warriors and Butler?
Well, I think it really highlights, the dangers of just relying on one superstar, not building a complete team around them. I mean, the Mavs they don't have the depth, they don't have the defense, and Luka's carrying this just incredible burden, right? Whereas the Warriors, I mean, even though Butler's a huge addition, he's fitting into a system that's already
well established. And so it really shows, how important it is to have balance,
right,
and to have players whose skill sets complement each other.
Right.
And it seems like that's what they've got going on.
It seems like it.
So to kind of sum it all up, Jimmy Butler's arrival it's injected new life into the Warriors.
Yeah.
You can't deny that.
Absolutely.
Their record's better, and what he does on the court, it just seems to fit
seamlessly.
Yeah. But there's still some legitimate questions,
right,
about whether they could beat the best teams in the playoffs, especially when you consider the schedule they've had and the lack of experience of some of those role players. But then you have the playoff Jimmy factor.
It's the wild card,
which is the big wild card, right? He's got that reputation for raising his game when it matters most, and that could be the difference between winning it all or not.
Exactly. And hopefully this deep dive has given you all a clearer picture, right, of how Jimmy Butler has impacted the Warriors. It's more than just adding another player. It's about his skill set, his mentality, and the challenges they still face.
Yeah, it's complex. It's not black and white.
It's not.
And so on that note, right, we saw the Warriors go up with Butler and the Mavs kind of go down after the Doncic trade.
Right.
What does that tell us about what it takes to build a real contender in today's NBA?
It's the question, isn't it?
It's the question. All right, well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everybody.
Appreciate it.